And what I think we're starting to see, and an example would be the Internet of Things. That, from the teddy bear you buy your kid to the new oven that you bought, everything has the ability for interconnectivity. So it's really hard now to start to tell where VR ends and AI begins. These technologies are becoming enmeshed and immersed with one another, where you can't clearly or easily separate out a lot of this technology. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't necessarily think so. I think the more technology develops, for me, and I still like teaching, when I can, is having education as accessible and equitable. And I think that's pretty clear cut for me in terms of you've got to look at the greatest good that you can do for the greatest amount of students. And part of that equation is to make sure that they have the right tools for the job.
If AI feels overwhelming, you're not behind. You're just busy running a business. New tools pop up every week and then no one has time to figure out what actually works. At LionEdge AI, we take AI off your plate so you can focus on running your business. We review your setup, choose the right tools, and run AI systems across sales, customer support, and operations. No noise, no learning curve. LionEdge AI, your unfair advantage in the AI era. Imagine a world where dissecting frogs is as easy as playing a video game, and learning anatomy feels like a sci-fi adventure. Meet John King from VictoryXR, a company that's turning traditional education on its head with VR and AI. From politics to pioneering tech in classrooms, John's journey is anything but ordinary. Curious about how a political strategist became a tech innovator? Stay tuned to find out how VictoryXR is making education accessible, engaging, and downright futuristic. All right, welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Mr. John King, and I guarantee you that's going to be a very interesting discussion. John, please introduce yourself and the company.
Hey, well, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invite. My name's John King, and I work for a company called VictoryXR, and I'm the senior director for the higher education and enterprise divisions. And we're a 3D spatial learning company that helps bring solutions to educators in AR, VR, and AI tools.
Beautiful. So let's first of all, what are we talking about? What's the size of the company?
Yeah, we're around 60 individuals, so we're fairly small in operation, but we pack a big punch in that, I think for anyone who's ever worked in a startup, you know that you have several duties and roles. So it's an exciting place to be, and especially for industries such as technology, it really is actually, I think, an advantage to have a small, capable team that can adapt, move quickly, and adjust given the fast changing nature of the technology.
All right. Before we jump into, I want to learn more about your product and exactly how it helps, higher ed. What can you tell us about like the reason why this company was founded and the vision that the company has?
Yeah, well, the founding vision is really the mastermind of Steve Grubbs, our CEO, and he used to work in the Iowa State Legislature on the education panel. And in his time, he saw many of the things that his, I guess, future employees also saw at the same time, which is education was changing and changing fast. And at the end of the day, the idea that there is a responsibility of a society and government and a community to provide good educational opportunities, I think that's something that everyone can get behind. And after his work in the state legislature, he founded VictoryXR, and I was lucky to come on early in the venture about 4.5 years ago. But we were founded in 2016, so we've been doing it for a while. And we started working primarily with K through 12 education, but have since expanded to four main areas. And that encompasses K through 12 education, higher education, homeschool, and corporate and enterprise solutions.
Very interesting. Steve, from what if I'm not mistaken, if I heard right, is not someone who came from the education space, right?
No, he came from politics. That
Politics.
was his bread and butter for a long time. And I think a lot of those skills actually, transpose well into what we do now. And really it comes down to, Steve, is a great listener. He's a visionary. He's someone who can, take the lay of the land and then draw from it, where things might be improved, but more importantly, where people need help. And I think that, for most people, they can commiserate with the pandemic being a challenging time for education. And that particularly revolves around, how do you provide good services and education if you can't be right there with someone at the hip, right? And in our modern world, we all live from our devices on the go, mobily. And I think that reflects in the other areas of our society, which education is one. So, where I'm going with this is that there is also a modern expectation from students that if I'm going to be educated, I should have those resources available to me whenever and wherever I need. And I think that's really a big need that we're trying to meet.
Absolutely. You know, um, I think it's always fascinating, when I talk with guests in the show. A lot of my guests, almost all of them, are entrepreneurs or people that join initiative like you, that you joined from almost, I guess, from inception or very close to inception. And when people from different background actually have the passion to create value on something that it's not their natural habitat, right? It's not their natural background. I think I always find it fascinating because it tells that, you know, we all know entrepreneurship is a very hard journey. And if you don't have the motivation inside you to overcome challenges, then your statistics of finding yourself in, in the failure companies is increasing, right? So you need to have this inner passion, inner fire inside you to do that. And again, I think I find it very inspiring. Now, what's also interesting of what you mentioned, and I'm wondering if you can shed some light on that, is that you said you guys started like back in 2016, right?
That's correct.
So so this is super interesting because one, it was a whole different world, technology wise, society wise, right? It's like almost like, previous century. I don't know, right? With everything that they've been through ever since. And then obviously it was pre pandemic and the technology was different than what we have today. And we're going to talk about the technology, later on today. But so I'm curious, back in those days, what was the reasoning, the motivation to create such a solution? I don't know if you guys had VR back then. Maybe it was just, yeah. So share us, what was it like, when you guys first started?
Yeah, well, truth be told, I wasn't there at the founding at the time, but given the lore of the company and certainly our close and continued coordination from that beginning and founding mission, is technology evolves exponentially. That creates a challenge for humans. And the idea is that develops at a rate that most humans are not updating themselves on. Fall victim to that in our own lives, right? That's why you don't update your operating system. That's why you have, older generation phones. It's because it's known, it's convenient. But at the end of the day, a lot of times innovations are informed from art, society, and one can imitate the other, and it's not necessarily a one-way street. And I think if you look at some inspirations, things like the movie Ready Player One, if you look at precursors to what we see now in the VR world, like Second Life, which was an immersive or tried to be an immersive three-dimensional, eco space for people to teach in. And I think, frankly, in a lot of the hardware respects, at 2016, it was either completely unaffordable or the technology in a lot of cases just wasn't there. And what you're seeing is that technology evolves is that because it is exponential in development, that it feels like time is accelerating in terms of how quickly things are coming out. And we've all kind of been, I guess victim is not the right word, but we've experienced it over the last 12 months with the advent of AI and its rapid adoption.
Exactly. So let's fast forward for today. Um, whatever happened in the past it's not relevant for now, but you guys made it. You're still here, you're still, performing, and I I'm wondering now that the technology is here. So the VR, whether it's goggles or other devices, we have them for several years, and it's keep improving. But we have some good quality ever since, I don't know, um, several good years. You know, a funny story. My office used to be just next to the office of the guy who invented, while he was working on the meta goggles. And,
Oh, wow.
yeah, and nobody, for us, we didn't understand what these kids are doing, and then we read in the news that they were acquired like I think like 2 billion or whatever, right? So that was funny, but the quality was great even there. However, now with AI, I think it changes the whole solution, or not changes, maybe enhance the solution and opens up possibilities that weren't before by embedding AI with the hardware.
Yeah, you make an interesting comment, which I would liken it to this, which is, a lot of people like black and white, right? That makes it easiest for humans to compartmentalize and say this or that, right? A bit of a binary choice. And what I think we're starting to see, and an example would be the Internet of Things. That, from the teddy bear you buy your kid to the new oven that you bought, everything has the ability for interconnectivity. So it's really hard now to start to tell where VR ends and AI begins. These technologies are becoming enmeshed and immersed with one another, where you can't clearly or easily separate out a lot of this technology. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't necessarily think so. I think the more technology develops, for me, and I still like teaching, when I can, is having education as accessible and equitable. And I think that's pretty clear cut for me in terms of you've got to look at the greatest good that you can do for the greatest amount of students. And part of that equation is to make sure that they have the right tools for the job. Whether you're a contractor building a house or a student learning your way in the world, for a lot of the technologies now, you can access them via your laptop or desktop or your Chromebook. As an example, we're coming out with all of our AI tools at the end of Q1 available on mobile devices because we know that many people live from their phones. And particularly in other countries around the world, especially the global south, a lot of people never had desktop computers. They've leapfrogged from traditional projectors to have an iPhone in their hands. So you also can't ignore how those technologies dictate people's interactions with information and technology. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of schools are struggling to come to grips with.
Yeah, yeah. You've been, as you mentioned, you've been around, and obviously you can tell because on your website you can see the variety of solutions that you have for the different segment. You have, I don't know, one, two, almost like 10 different solutions. You have segments for higher education. You have quick K-12, homeschool. Uh, if you were to describe maybe the common thing to all of your solution, right? Because we can't talk about each and every solution, but help us understand what is it. What exactly is it? I mean, from the user experience, like, is it only by wearing a devices? Is it also, just in front of screen?
Hmm.
And what's the main idea, and I would just say benefit of using your specific solution versus anything other alternate solution, right? Help us just understand that.
Sure. So I want to start from a little bit of a philosophical perspective. And I think this will address why people use this technology, right? Generally speaking, why does this have value? And then let's funnel it down and I'll tell you where we stand in that mix and why I think we're unique in what we have and how we operate. At the end of the day, some two truths about this technology. And, just for reference, most educational software developers work across a wide array of devices. And I think at the high end, you have 6 DOF VR headsets. And for those unfamiliar with the acronym DOF, stands for degrees of freedom, right? So that movements of your head up, down, left, right, forward, back. If you're trying to give people the realest and most immersive experience, probably going to be done with a VR headset. But cascading down from that, we know that most students have a phone, most students have a laptop, but not most students have a VR headset, right? Due to a lot of factors. So again, making this solution available on a device, whether it's a VR headset or a phone that people actually have, that's the first step to solving people's problems, right? If you don't have access to it, it's all a moot point until you do. Right? So is you look at why people use these solutions. I like to steer people towards, a fact of human nature. And that's this. There are very few people in this world who can clearly identify a problem and then articulate a specific solution to that problem. Most people, they can identify the problems. And that's where we step in and say, anything that you're doing in your process, and that could be in education or training, that is financially, logistically, spatially, or procedurally challenging, those are great candidates for applying this technology and reverse engineering a solution. So let me give you an example to illustrate this. Right? A lot of colleges, take a community college in somewhere America, right? Their lab facilities were built in the late 1970s, right? Their enrollment has boosted and they don't have enough instructors. So for that biology 101 lab, you end up having to take it at 7 p.m. at night with 8 other people standing around a little table cutting up a little dead frog, right, for your lab.
Yeah.
Right. So you have logistical challenges, you have financial challenges, you have procedural challenges. With VR, what you could do is you could go into a headset and do that frog dissection by yourself with friends. You could do it on campus, you could do it off campus, you could do it at your grandma's house, you could do it at the airport, right? And you can do it indefinitely, as many times as you need to. And you can't do that with a little real dead frog. You only get to cut them up once. So hopefully that's illustrative of a problem that a lot of schools have. And then how you apply this technology, how you alleviate some of those challenges and roadblocks. Right? So how do we fit in? Well, I think our philosophy is that, if you look at VR educational tools in general and by proxy AI tools, you've had some people doing it for a long time. No one's used VR more or longer than aviation or healthcare, specifically nursing. So it's not a new idea, but for most of the disciplines, our angle is that we got something for everybody, right? If you look at the verticals, the K through 12, the higher ed, the homeschool, the enterprise, that we're not catering specifically and only to high-end medical training. We're not specifically catering to foundational math school, math skills in K through 12. We're trying to hit that middle 80% of the bell curve. And again, that goes back to equity and access. You got to have something for everybody if you want to bring everybody to the table. And I think that's where we stand in the market in terms of our offerings and why we're attractive and work with schools at a systemic level.
Very interesting. I have so many questions for you right now, and I also looking at your website, and for example, I see the human being skeleton, and then another layer that you apply the muscles, and then the veins, and you know, I'm sure. So you can either see it from a book, right? And then you turn the page, and it's very kind of old school, and not that much of intrigue, triggering your sensors in a way.
Hmm.
You can watch a video, or you can put the goggles or the VR, and I'm seeing on the website, and you can see the different type of human body layers. Let's call it this way, as they are standing right in front of you. So then, in my mind, the experience of learning through that and seeing that create an education experience that really sits well in your brain, not just to remember for many years, but also to really understand. There is a huge difference between reading about it, right, to actually seeing it, right? And then, and then you can relate to it on your own body. So this is fascinating. And I got to tell you one more thing that I find it funny when you talked about the frog dissection. I remember I went to my kids' school, parents' night, and I stumbled upon a bag that was very mushy and squeezy, It was nighttime, and I'm like, "What is it?" And I looked down, and it was a bag, a huge bag full with toads, ready for tomorrow for the kids. Let
Yeah.
me tell you something. This was like 8 p.m., dark. Wasn't a great experience. And I'm thinking, joke aside, but there are kids that this could be, because they started at a very young age. My son was, I don't know, um, 10, 11, something, right? Where they, they start at this young age where they actually dissect a frog. And maybe for some kids, that's an experience that it's hard for them to process or to even, be there. And then, that's another thing that the VR, on top of everything that you mentioned, all the benefit that could help, some sensitive kids as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, an analogy is, people who go hunting, right? I have no problem with people who enjoy going out and paying a license to shoot deer, but it's not really for me. And I don't really need to do it because I can go and get hamburgers at the grocery store. I think that, whether you have animal rights concerns or you just don't like the smell of formaldehyde, either one of those also plays as something that gives people another option. And we live in the age of abundance. We live in the age of choice. People like choice. And, I think you've got to put it out there because, again, people who studied that 20 years ago might not be studying it the same way 20 years from now.
Yeah.
A lot of people have, I think, a challenge imagining what that might look like. So, I think providing, access, opportunities, and alternatives, that seems to be where people's heads are at in the modern era. And, I would be foolish not to meet them at least halfway, right? You got to meet people where they're at.
And you touched a very good point. If 20 years ago somebody would say exactly the same claim that you just made, 20 years from now, it's going to be different. They were wrong. We've been doing almost the same thing as my grandparents used to go to school, all right? With some nuances, all right? Yes, there is more modern today, but it's still a class. It's still one dimensional or one modality that the teacher used to teach all the kids at the same
Hmm.
pattern where, as you mentioned today with abundance, every kid might have a different path that they need to go through and a different way of how what matches their personality of how they learn.
Mm.
And with tools like yours and embedded now with the AI that opens up, the brain on top of
Mm.
the hardware, now you can, as you mentioned, abundance, and then the kids might find different ways. And my point is that I think you're absolutely right. And it's not just, same old saying like they said 20 years ago. We are living, we are, I think we are actually living in a very important history period in the
Yeah.
like, like, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but I truly believe that the AI revolution is going to be, 100 years from now, they're going to study, that it started and we are actually living history right now. And you think you're absolutely right. 20 years from now, not 20 years from now, even 10 years from now. And because the system, it takes time for them to, to adapt, it's going to be different. It has to be. It has to be because of this amazing technology and the kids already experience at home, right? Technology and advance and more modernization that they expect to see at school. And they don't have it yet.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you bring up that, there's a discrepancy between, I think, where students' heads are at and where the vast majority of administrations are at. And, with a lot of empathy and sympathy, because I've been on that side of the fence that, we're all busy people. And teachers, I think, broadly speaking, carry an extra burden, right? Because they're responsible for people's well-being and, hopefully one day becoming successful, great citizens and human beings. One of the fundamental dynamics I see, and it's a question I posed the other day to a colleague, was as a faculty member and professor, do you see yourself as an exclusive gatekeeper of knowledge, or do you see yourself as a shepherd towards knowledge? And I think that really will help tell you where people's heads are at. And and I'll give you another example of how this applies in education. Right? If I have the choice as a student without a bunch of money, right, or maybe natural opportunities through family, friends, or whatever, and I want to learn about AI, should I take the $99 Google course, or should I take the $4,000 MIT course?
You're right.
And I think that the content, from what I've seen, is pretty close. So people are confronted with a value proposition that they've got to think hard about. It
You're right.
is that MIT course 40 times the value of that Google course? I would argue probably not. So, as schools and universities move away from being the exclusive gatekeepers in terms of access to knowledge, how are they going to adjust to that? Right. And I think you already see a great divide between, I'll see schools issuing guidance to students and universities about AI, and it goes something like this: students, do not use AI. And I think at best that's wishful thinking
Exactly.
because students, as we all know, and young people in general, they're already living in the future.
Yes.
And that they're only going to wait so long as they mature to look for guidance from institutions until they just decide, I'm just going to make my decision myself. And that's a dangerous spot for traditional education institutions, not to provide guidance and facilitation to learn and be on top of these new technologies. That's a risk.
Absolutely. You made me think this subject, you and I can probably record another episode and just talk about that. So maybe we should do it, but just for the sake of the analogy about what you just said is that back in the history repeats itself. So we used to have, and again, I'm not by any means an expert of history, but I think this is true that back in hundreds years ago, churches and places of worship, right, were the authoritative institution for knowledge, and people would come there, right? And this was, and all the priests and the religion services people, right? They were the masters, and and you would learn from them, and they decided, and then fast forward for today, or at least the past 100 years, let's say, universities become, right?
Mm.
Now, you know, the Harvard, the Stanfords, all those elite universities are now the one who lead the way in terms of modernization, in terms of education and breakthrough in technology and science and all that, right? But now with AI and the internet and the fact that, as you mentioned, everyone has access to abundance of knowledge, and you can either get it for free or for $99, there is a real problem to sell the same material for 4,000. I mean, still, there might be people that buying it because the reputation, right? But I agree with you 100%. In fact, if you if you actually take those courses that, by the way, Google even give you for free, they are more updated and refreshed than, they might not be the most, you know what, I don't want to say, but I'm just saying they are more refreshed for sure than, a curriculum that was built, the same way that other classes are being taught.
I would agree 100%. And we all live in a life of 15 to 30-second video clip increments. Most people are on their phones. That, there's an expectation that you are getting up to date data information to work with if you're paying good money for it. And, I think that, the exciting thing, like all technologies of the past, is that every new one has a great potential to create change for good. Right. And when we see, you know, the education market broadly, that's not an equitable market. It's not an equitable market in the United States. It's certainly not equitable globally. So, part of encouraging people to look at technologies is one, let them try it, right? I think about when I got my first video game console, right? It comes with a free game. I didn't read the instruction manual. I put in the game and started having some fun and free play. And I think you've got to give people that ability to,
Yeah,
excite their inner child. Right.
absolutely.
You also have to do your due diligence too, but it can be fun. Right. I
Absolutely.
think, secondly, providing, especially young people, right, who are trying to figure out which way to go in life. I think having exposure to as many avenues as possible, particularly when it comes to professions, is a great thing. And I'll give you an example of some of the stuff that we do. Is that we work with a lot of summer programs, upward bound programs, trio programs, Title I programs. And it's because, one, those have been underserved programs in the past, students particularly. But also, I think the calculus has changed in the last 10 to 15 years. And I'll give you an example. There's a drastic shortage of trained, skilled workers in the United States for jobs that pay good money and are in high demand. The problem is, most of those jobs are not 9 to 5 sitting in an air conditioned office. They're being an electrical lineman, being a plumber, being a welder. You can make great money doing these, and you can get a job as soon as you get qualified to do it. And when I was coming up, that was not an option, right? Everyone either poo pooed the trades or said, if you don't go to college and graduate, you're going to be a failure, right? That was the basic message. And after teaching here back in the United States, the students that dropped out and went to career and technical education schools, they're all doing really well. Um, but some of the kids who graduated with undergrad degree are slinging coffees at the local, coffee shop, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if your intent was to get a professional job with benefits and salary, I might think they'd be a bit disappointed. So, there's a lot of opportunity in these spaces that I don't think traditionally has been shown to students early on. And, everybody's got a different path, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right. I want to switch gears a little bit. We talked a lot, about vision and the future and your philosophy of how you see things, but and of course about how AI is being utilized in your services to your client, right? Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how AI can help our businesses, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not. Let's take it to behind the scenes. Let's take this to the operation side. And I wonder, what do you see? Maybe you're already doing this. Maybe you're thinking of doing this. Maybe you want a solution to solve. Let's choose something that you think can be done better, or you are challenging, with something right now in the business, a process or sales or whatever. And how do you see AI technology? And it could be a lot of things, right? AI is not just ChatGPT. Um, to help of running it more effective, maybe less costly, right?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a couple examples. Again, I'll start from a philosophical perspective because I think there are two truths around this technology that maybe go under people's radar. And the first truth I find is, at the end of the day, AI is a subject matter agnostic technology. You can apply it to anything. A good analogy to this is a calculator. If you met someone and said, "Well, John, a calculator is only for a math class," I would say, "Well, what about accounting? What about chemistry? What about statistics?" The point is that you can do a lot with a calculator, but a lot of people only look at it as a purely math class tool. Right? The other truth I find is that in the modern era, the real power of technology is in its mobile ability, that we can take it anywhere and use it at any time. So if you look at the AI tools that we have, and I'll give you an example, particularly in the business realm, we have VR simulations that allow you to complete OSHA safety training. So that's often a required training certificate for general workplace safety. We've got forklift training. We've got defibrillator training, right, for people who have strokes or heart attacks to administer first aid. We also have fire safety training. And where this is applicable to businesses and saving money and process and time is that a lot of times, because these are required trainings, you have to fly people out, you have to hire trainers, you have to line up physical schedules, people got to drive in, and you start to incur some of those costs: financial, logistical, spatial, procedural. So, if you're trying to check some boxes and get people expedited through a training process, sending them a headset so they can knock it out so that they're ready to go day one on their new job, that saves everybody time and money, right? Saves the new employee money, it saves and time, it saves the employer money and time. So I think that's a pretty simple example of where you're seeing this being applied. And again, OSHA safety training, that's required in dozens and dozens of industries. So again, going back to the subject matter agnostic capabilities, but doing it anywhere you want at any time, I think, is a huge benefit and an expectation in the modern era. And then being able to tweak it for any discipline, any subject, gives people the flexibility to apply it to all areas of their business, which I heard a great musing the other day that, in the next couple years, we're going to see the first billion-dollar one-person company.
Right.
In the way I see AI tools, think about making a fire. If you ever made a fire using a lighter and some twigs or a traditional way, there's a couple steps you got to go through. Using AI is like dumping a gallon of gasoline on that fire and lighting a match. It's an accelerant. And AI allows people who are curious, inquisitive, desirous of knowledge to accelerate their processes towards whatever goal they're trying to achieve. And I think that's the great utility in the technology.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I'm wondering, I'm sure that, as you mentioned, if you know how to use LLMs, whether it's ChatGPT or anything else, for whatever task that you do, if you know how to do it right, I think today is actually expected from us to deliver more or maybe even faster quality work. And you can do it because you have this helper. Now, again, I said you need to do it right because you need to know to ask the right questions, let's say the right prompt, and you need to make sure that you understand what you've been given because then you need to back it up, in whatever situation it is. But I wonder if at Victory XR, do you use other tools than just an individual interacting with the chat GPTs of the world?
Yeah, so, I think the way that I would approach that answer is talking about framing the engagement. And really what I'm getting at is the thing that scares the bejesus out of most educators as it relates to this technology is the idea that they don't have control over it, right? Not in a malicious prison guard kind of way, but more in how can I structure and frame the engagement for my students that still maximizes my expertise while using this technology to great good. So the way that our AI tools work is we use a backbone large language model, ChatGPT. Right? And within our application or our app, we're allowing people to use what we call the creator space in our Hollow Tutor tool to create your own AI teaching assistants for any course, any discipline, any subject, any educational level. You can create patient simulators, which is essentially an AI patient with a disease, right? So you can get people to practice interacting with situations that otherwise they just won't be able to do as a student. Right? In providing this creator ability within the framework of our app, right? Make sure that you follow this principle, or I guess avoid this principle, which is you might have heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. So going back to your comment, even if you put in bad prompts in ChatGPT, you're going to get something decent. But if you really know what you're doing, right, you're going to get even better stuff. And where the teacher is still critical in this process is that as they build out these AI tools for their students, they're driving the ship, right? And they're using their content from their courses that they know is good. So the input is good. And then when students are engaging with that large language model, asking questions about the material, anything that comes back is weighted by the material that the instructor has put into that experience. So you know the outputs will be valid. And that's how we allow teachers to feel like they're in control and framing the engagement with students. Right? We have analytics that you can follow and track and see people's progress so that there's some validation of the correctness as well as being able to provide guidance to students, right? That
Yeah.
if the answer is just don't use AI, I don't think you can expect students to follow that guidance, right?
Right.
Not without self-deluding. And going forward, the real value is that you can, one, take work off teachers' plates. Teachers tend to like that. They're busy people. And you're meeting students where they're already at. I think that's another important thing. So it should be a win-win.
Absolutely. Now, I wonder at Victory XR, right? At your own company, are there already other tools other than, working with ChatGPT or similar that you find valuable that, help you with expedite process, automate processes that you would recommend other businesses to use?
Yeah, well, and I think, one, we have a great development team, and, they're really the tip of the spear when you talk about the integration and application of that technology. I think that going back to those core principles, if doesn't matter what you're doing, but whether you're a coordinator for scheduling travel nurses to studying botany and coastal plain, that if you can identify the problems that you're struggling with, take that over to this technology and reverse engineer some expedited solutions. And then people's eyes light up. I think the old teach a man to fish analogy, which is I'm not trying to convince people to go from Pepsi to Coke. Right? People know what both of those things are. It's just a matter of preference. When you're trying to introduce new technologies to people, oftentimes you have to partly teach them what it is, right? Before you could convince them to play with it or adopt it. So that's where the education comes in. But I think that's also where the fun comes in. That there's a little bit of unknown there, and that can be scary, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, it should be a net positive and benefit because that's what technology is for. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We are getting to the top of the hour, and I want to end this episode with a question that I'm very curious about your answer. If today, let's assume we are New Year's Eve 2027. John King looked back at 2026 and think to himself, I'm very pleased with this achievement that I made, right? I'm talking about in your role at Victory XR, right? What would that be for you?
I think, I'm a microcosm of a bigger mission here at the company. So when I would look back as in terms of professional success, what I would qualify is, and I'll use a rough analogy again, which is for the last couple years, I've been doing a lot of hunting, wandering the woods, looking for opportunities and bringing new schools in to give them a chance to pilot programs and technologies. Because to be honest, it's still early days. But 2026 is, for me, the year of farming, setting up roots. And the idea is that for a lot of educational institutions, you need to reach a critical mass of adoption around, let's say, 15 to 20% of the entire institution to reach a tipping point. And the tipping point really revolves around trust and utility. So what I would like to see is, many of our partners adopt this technology at a systemic level across the entire institution to create that equity of opportunity to use this technology. And, I have a special place in my heart for community colleges. I was a product of one. So empowering career and technical community colleges to support the men and women who are going to be doing the jobs that we all need, plumbers, electricians, right? Carpenters, welders, that I think there's going to be a big boom in the career and technical trades coming back, and I'd love to be a supporter of that.
Beautiful. Okay, Martin.
Appreciate the invite. I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed all of our conversations in the past. So hopefully, this will get out and people will enjoy and, learn a little bit of something.
Absolutely. John, this was a pleasure. Thank you for the time. And I'm really looking forward to see what else Victory's XR, gonna provide and develop. Because I think this is just beginning. This is just the beginning. There are so much opportunities now and can't wait to see what's coming next. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you too. And let's stay in touch.
If AI feels overwhelming, you're not behind. You're just busy running a business. New tools pop up every week and no one has time to figure out what actually works. At LionEdge AI, we take AI off your plate so you can focus on running your business. We review your setup, choose the right tools, and run AI systems across sales, customer support, and operations. No noise, no learning curve. LionEdge AI, your unfair advantage in the AI era.